Oh my god, I look like a little schoolgirl. Even though I'm neither. I wanted to do like the aesthetic of like flowers in the hair, but it's really not working with this outfit. So we're just gonna take them out. Hello everyone, long time no see. I think every video I post now will start with that because literally every video will be like a year from each other and you'll be like, Julie's alive. Welcome to my Little Women video. That's the nickname I'm gonna call it, but the full-on title is whatever you see below me. And you're like, why is Julia making this video? I don't know either. So I've always liked Little Women. I read it probably when I was a freshman in high school. I enjoyed it, and I've always liked the story of it and the themes that are presented in it. This video is all thanks to Elena, a person I've never met, but she has produced music on TikTok based around characters. And one of the most recent EPs that she has released is the Little Woman EP, which basically each song is a song based on a character from Little Women. I really enjoyed the EP a lot. I just really liked the songs. And one night I was doing an editing because sometimes I like to edit fun edits when I'm really into a piece of media. Originally, I was going to take her Lori song and like edit it to possibly the Timothy Chalamet Lori. But then I thought of this idea of editing all the different kinds of Loris that I've seen and editing them together to the song. But then when I was doing it, I was like, this is really interesting to look at all of these three different adaptations and how they handle the proposal scene. And it got me thinking of comparing and watching all these adaptations and seeing how they differ from each other. Adaptations are so fascinating to me. If you take like a piece of media of a book and you develop it into different kinds of mediums, there's gonna be different things that come out of it. So that's really interesting to see not only Little Women adapted into multiple different film adaptations, but also looking at it from like literally the song adaptation. Like that's an adaptation of it of itself. Originally this video was gonna be much longer. It was probably gonna be like a Quentin Reviews-esque thing of different commercial breaks, looking at different other adaptations in different other mediums, looking at the queer subtext of Little Women. I was gonna do a whole thing with that. Sadly, my storage on my computer cannot handle it. Maybe that's a sequel to this video, but for right now, I'm just personally looking at these adaptations that I chosen to look at. Waka waka. So originally I was just gonna go right into, talking about each of the adaptations, but then my editor sent me a text and was like, hey, shouldn't you explain what Little Women is about before you talk about Little Women? And I was like, oh, that's a good point, because not everyone knows the summary and the Spark Notes version of Little Women. So I'm going to give you at least the rundown or the basic synopsis of what happens. So basically Little Women follows the four March sisters, Jo, Beth, Amy, and Meg, that's their names, while living in Concord, Massachusetts during the Civil War. Their father has been fighting for the Union for a few years, and it's only been them and their mother and their servant, Hannah. If you want a description of each of the characters, Jo is more of the headstrong writer character who's more of our main protagonist of the book. Then you have Meg, who is more of the like older sister who wants to get married. You have Beth, who's kind of more of the shy one, but also is the very selfless one. Then you have Amy, who is the younger, more immature one. Many things happen to them, but one of the main things that happens to them is that their next door neighbor, Mr. Lawrence, takes in his young grandson, Lori, because both of his parents have died. And Jo and the sisters become friends with Lori, and many misadventures happen. And the story is told throughout their adult life, ending with Meg getting married to Lori's tutor, Mr. John Booth. Was his really name John? No, not Booth. Brooke. That's his. I was getting confused with the person who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Amy grows up, goes to France, and actually ends up marrying Lori. Jo ends up going to New York, becoming a writer, and falling in love with the professor. And then Beth dies of scarlet fever. What a happy ending. But yeah, that's a basic summary of Little Women. Sorry if I spoiled it. This book has been out for many years. So let's go on to the first adaptation on our first chapter of this video.
I don't like being left behind. Now I'm the one going ahead.
First adaptation we'll be looking at is Little Woman 1994. Now, before I get into this, I'm just gonna let you all know that each of my outfits are somehow corresponding with the adaptation. If you wanted to comment your ideas of how whatever I'm wearing relates to the adaptation, let me know. There's also possibly something over here that might relate to it. So if you are unfamiliar with Little Woman 1994, Little Woman 1994 basically stars Winona Ryder I saw this movie when I was 12, and then 3 years later, she made me realize I was bi, so thank you, Winona Ryder. It also stars Claire Danes as Beth, and if you don't know who Claire Danes is, she is Juliet in Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't love to talk about actors' love life, but this lady is married to Will Graham and Prince Charmant, so you know what? She won at life. Then you also have young Kristen Dunst playing the young version of Amy. Trini Avaldo plays Meg. And then Samantha Mathis plays the older version of Amy. And most famously, the person that plays Laurie is Christian Bale. Christian Bale and I have a weird relationship. We've never met. I'm always like, I don't know. I don't really like Christian Bale. Any movie I see him in, like, I don't really like him. But then every time I watch a Christian Bale movie, I'm like, I love Christian Bale. And then also Susan Sarandon plays Marmee. This Little Women adaptation is one of the first Little Women, or probably one of the first Little Women to ever have a woman direct and also a woman write the script. And it's really fascinating to look at the woman who wrote the script for this movie because she wrote a lot of good shit. She wrote the original Matilda movie. She wrote Practical Magic. She wrote The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which made her nominated for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. She also directed the movie called The Jane Austen Book Club, a movie I've seen that also stars Hugh Dancy. I just keep on filling in the Hannibal references. I kind of have a bias towards this movie because this is probably the first Little Woman adaptation I had seen when I was little before I read the book. So I really like this adaptation, and I think with it having a woman director really adds to it, especially when there is a large woman cast and the whole thing is about friendship and sisterhood and family. And when you have a woman director, for some reason, I feel like it helps it a lot. So basically how this movie tells its storyline is through linear storytelling, which is kind of different than some Little Women adaptations recently. However, this is majority of how most of them are done. Which most of the time starts off with Marmee coming home, them getting a letter from their father. It usually starts off during Christmas. So one of my things that I don't love about this movie is that a lot of it is told through Joe's narration. Like sometimes I think narration can work really well if it's an unreliable narrator, like in Fight Club. I don't know why I'm using Fight Club as an example, but you get the gist. But like Joe literally tells, like, I think there's one point where Joe is like, yes, then Beth didn't die. She just was wounded. And it's like, we know that. We know that Beth is okay for the time being. And we know she's not as good as she was because she is like, you can see Claire Danes' acting, but also probably the makeup crew making her look more paler and paler. There's times when you need narration for exposition, but kind of throughout the story, you can tell what is going on. And also for Little Women to be a classic story, like, yeah, like we know that their father's off in the war. They got a letter from him. I do want to talk about one of my really big things that I really, really love about this movie, which I kind of mentioned earlier with having a woman director and a woman screenwriter, is that I really, really like the chemistry between these girls. I think they all do a really good job. There's only 2 adaptations on this list that recast Amy as an older actress to show that time has passed. And I don't know how I personally feel about either keeping the actor or recasting her. I think Kristen Dunst does a fantastic job when she's 12. I think she's really, really good. Like Kristen Dunst, any movie I see Kristen Dunst in, even if it like the script is like she's still giving her all. Like Spider-Man, Mary Jane's annoying as hell, but you know what? Good for Kristen Dunst. And I think she does really, really good to have the childhood innocence. Like there's a scene where when Beth is sick and she has to leave to go stay with the grandma, and she's with Laurie in the car, and she's talking about if she dies, and it's so heartbreaking to hear like this come out of a young girl's mouth of her being like, give Meg my like green chest, give Joe my this, and she's like, I just don't want to die. And it's really heartbreaking to hear a 12-year-old say that. And I think sometimes the scene between Laurie and Amy talking about how he'll kiss her if she dies is really weird just based on it, but the way that they choose it in this version is a little more like sympathetic. Like you can tell that Laurie and Amy really have a good like friendship before they go into a romance. I think Laurie's only really saying it to like make Amy feel happy, and also he kisses her on like the cheek or like the forehead, so like you can kind of tell like he's not seriously gonna kiss this 12-year-old on the lips. Also, he laughs about it after he says it. So, like, you can kind of tell it's a joke compared to some other adaptation, which we'll be getting into later. But speaking of Amy and Laurie, that is also one of my problems that I have with this movie, is I feel like there's not enough Amy and Laurie to care about their relationship, if that makes sense. There's like probably about 3 scenes in total of just Amy and Laurie, if that makes sense. Like, even counting her as a young kid, there's only like one individual scene, which I just talked about Amy and Laurie. And then we get into like when she's in Paris, oui, and she's painting and he visits her and he gets jealous. And there's only like 2 scenes of them and then they weirdly get engaged. I don't feel like the chemistry between the adult version of Amy and Christian Bale's Laurie is there when they do those scenes. I just feel like there's not enough chemistry between those two to have the same energy that I felt with Laurie and Amy, like when they were younger. Not that I'm shipping them as a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, but more so of seeing this very strong bond. But speaking of chemistry, I really, really love Winona Ryder's Joe and Christian Bale's Laurie. I think they really give off really good, like, energy. I think it seems like they had probably a good time. They seem like very nice enough actors that they will have a fun time. And I think that proposal scene, like, is very, very soft but compelling compared to other adaptations, if that makes sense. Because he's not screaming on a rooftop. He's not screaming on a hillside. The one thing I don't like is that he does non-consensually kiss her. That's the one thing I don't like about the scene. But it's, like, very soft. They're in the woods, hidden at a log. He grabs her hand. She looks at him weirdly for it. And then when he realizes that she doesn't love him like that, it's more so he's not yelling at her or, like, screaming at her at a large volume. He's more passionate. And it's really, really interesting to see Laurie like that, which is why I really, really like Christian Bale's Laurie. I think his Laurie is very emotional, which I really, really like. I really like that he's emotional, but you can kind of tell he's holding back because he's a man. And I think when he's with the sisters, he is allowed to be more of himself. And I really, really like that because there's, like, scenes where he's very flamboyant with his line delivery, or like what he does is like his actions. Like, there's one scene where he's telling Joe, like, my tutor has your sister's glove. And the way that he does something with the book and he smiles just really, really made me like him. And I really, really love Laurie. Laurie is one of my favorite characters, and I think he plays it really, really well. I kind of do wish he does have a scene with Joe after to talk about his feelings towards her based on Amy, because Amy and her have a scene together, but I kind of wish there was something with her and Laurie, because there's a scene in the 2019 version that we'll be getting into where Laurie talks about, I'm just going to say this right here, right now, I've always cared about you, but just my love for Amy is different. And I kind of wish there was a scene with Laurie and Joe to have that. Also, this is so off topic, but I started watching this movie with my mom, and we were talking about Mr. Brooke, because Mr. Brooke in a lot of adaptations just isn't really there. He's more prominent, I would say, in the 2019 version, but in this version, he's like more there than like the other adaptations that I've seen. But the funny thing is, I was like, this actor looks so familiar, but my mom and I say that all the time. Every time we see an actor that looks familiar, we're always like, they look so familiar. I want to tell you all, this actor was supposed to be Marty McFly in Back to the Future. So originally they wanted Michael J. Fox to play Marty McFly, and then he couldn't because he had Family Ties, a TV show he was filming. So they casted this one guy named Eric Stoltz. So they casted this dude, and then just him and the director weren't vibing really well. Like, his portrayal of Marty was very different than what they wanted, and he was more of a serious actor. So they fired him 2 weeks or like 3 weeks into the shoot, and then they like tried to make a deal with Michael J. Fox, like, hey, please, we need you for this movie. So it's really interesting to see not just another Back to the Future alum in another Little Woman adaptation, which again we'll be getting into soon. But yeah, I think it's interesting to have Mr. Brooke and Meg's relationship more. So far, obviously, it's more prominent in other adaptations too, but I think this is one of the first adaptations that really kind of took their relationship more. Speaking of other characters that I feel like are done really well in this production, I do really like how they do the professor. I think the professor, whoever plays the professor, does a really good job. I would say there's not a lot of chemistry between him and Joe, but you feel like there's a lot of like discussion between the two. I think he does a good job. There's one scene where I really, really liked it because it was a parallel between her and Laurie with his proposal, because they're watching this play and the professor kind of grabs her hand to hold it, and you can see Joe's face kind of be like, what? And then she looks down and she's like, you know what? I'm actually comfortable with this, compared to how Laurie grabs her hand in the proposal where she looks down and she keeps this confused face. You know what? I know that the professor wasn't originally supposed to be in the like original book, and in some adaptations they take him out, but I do really like the professor. I think he's good support for Joe. He shows her grow. I kind of wish the end had the professor with her family. I don't even think the movie ends with her family. I kind of wish the movie ended with her and her family all together, because the whole story of Little Women is family and sisterhood and having those connections. And I think that would have been a very, very strong ending compared to her kissing under the umbrella in the rain with a professor. There were some shots that I feel like should have lingered on a little more. I'm one of those people that really likes long shots. There's a shot where it's like when Beth is first sick, Joe wakes up, she goes downstairs, she sees the nanny, I think her name's Hannah, crying. Then it goes into the room and you see that Beth's bed is completely clear or something like that, like cleaned. And you don't hold on it for too long, because like that's supposed to like trick you off and be like, oh my God, she's dead. But then they quickly goes to her, like Beth and Marmee and Meg feeding Beth. And I feel like that the holding on the bed should have been longer. Also, speaking of Beth's death, for some reason they try to make it kind of mystical in this version, where Joe has this big monologue towards Beth. It's like there's a big storm happening and thunder crashes and the rain's pouring and Joe's crying, and it's low-key very melodramatic. This movie is not that melodramatic. It's very soft. So for that scene to have this big thunderstorm and then Joe turns and Beth's dead, it just doesn't really fit. I just kind of wish Beth's death was kind of like, you know, like I kind of wish like Joe had her big moment with Beth and then Beth like silently dies. Maybe that's just my perspective on how to handle Beth's death, but I felt like how this movie was done was kind of like cozy and warm, and with the emotional parts, it wasn't so overdramatic. Like, for example, Laurie's proposal to Joe. Oh, speaking of Laurie's proposal, not really, but speaking of Laurie, to show that time has passed from when Laurie goes off to, I believe, England to study his like grandfather's business, he grows a goatee to show that time has passed. And let me just say, a goatee does not look good on Christian Bale. I wrote in my Letterboxd review that he looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, but, you know, Shaggy even looks better with a goatee. I feel like that is really it for this adaptation. It's one of those adaptations where I feel like it's really good. Like, it's one of those, like, very comforting adaptations that are kind of like, they have a lot of the characters and they understand a lot of it, but it doesn't do a lot. If I'm gonna compare this to a different adaptation, I'm comparing this to the Sense and Sensibility adaptation that Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet are in. Like, that movie is like very good. It tells the story well. The actors do a great job, but there's nothing really special about it. However, this is one of the first times that Little Women had a really big adaptation since like the 50s. That is my thoughts.
I used every power in my possession to stop myself from loving you. And now I know I never shall.
Hello, welcome to the second chapter of my Little Women review. Welcome to the first and only TV show adaptation on this list. Now, there's been a lot of TV adaptations of Little Women, but I wanted to focus on the Little Women 2017. So the Little Women 2017 miniseries is done in 3 parts and was produced by PBS in collaboration with their Masterpiece series, which is known for a lot of like old-timey period pieces like Downton Abbey and Sanditon. This cast is more well-known. Maya Hawke plays Jo, who you may know from Stranger Things as Robin. Willa Fitzgerald plays Meg March. Catherine Newton plays Amy March, both young and old. This is the first out of the 2 adaptations of Little Women that has the same actress playing young and older Amy. This actress may look familiar to you from your childhood. She's from Supernatural. I'm not saying that any louder. Death March is played by Anne's Hellway. Laurie is played by Jonathan Hari King, who at first you probably don't know who he is, but you will know him in 2023 when he plays Prince Eric in the Little Mermaid adaptation, which I'll probably rant about at some point in this video. Emily Watson plays Marmee March, and Aunt March is played by Angela Lansbury, who is a very well-known actress, but the only thing I know her from is Tale as Old as Time. So my backstory with this series has, I remember watching it in 2020 or something around that time, because I was interested to see Maya Hawke in something that wasn't Stranger Things and seeing the guy that's playing Prince Eric in something. And I didn't really like it for many reasons that are still valid when I rewatched it for this video. But I feel like I hated on it too much when it first came out. Because it was in the cups after Little Woman 2019 and also my love for the 1994 version. So first off with this series, what I really, really like about this series and the difference from a lot of the adaptations that I have seen is that since it is a TV show, there is more time dedicated to each of the characters and you see more of the March siblings that don't get a lot of look at, including I feel like Meg is given more time and also so is Beth. And I really, really like that. However, that comes with a problem. Like every time there's a good thing about this show, there's always a negative with it. So even though I do think they give more time to the characters in this version, I still feel like they give too much time with this version. So like, for example, in many adaptations of Little Women, after Laurie's proposal to Joe, that is when she goes to New York. In this version, it's really weird because Joe goes to New York for, I forget why, even though I literally just finished this show like 5 minutes ago. But Joe goes to New York, then comes back, and then Laurie proposes to her and she declines it. I don't know if that's how it is in the book, but sometimes when you're adapting something that is longer, sometimes you have to cut it short and change things around for pacing. And I feel like the TV show is trying to be very, very close to the book, which sometimes works in its favor, but sometimes it is a disadvantage for them. The thing that is also very different from different adaptations is that this adaptation is very much darker than the other adaptations. It shows more of the war and it shows more of like death in children due to the scarlet fever. And also it shows Amy getting like basically hurt from the teacher that she has when she brings limes to school. It works in a lot of the emotional aspects of the show. However, Little Woman, yes, there's sad parts, but there's also a lot of nice heart to it. And I feel like that's kind of missing from this version. One scene that I really like that's not in really any other ones is when the March sisters and Laurie make a snowman for Beth and they sing to her, and it's very sweet. That's one of the only times that we ever see all the sisters interacting with Laurie. Sometimes in a lot of adaptations they completely forget that Laurie has a relationship with a lot of the sisters, but I do also like that with this adaptation. Like each of the March sisters have some kind of thing with Laurie. Another thing I really do like about this adaptation is that more is given to Marmee, which is really cool. I think Marmee's internal struggles of being a mother and trying to be there as her husband is away really comes through in here. One of the most memorable scenes I can think of is her reacting to Beth's death, because in a lot of adaptations we see Joe's reaction to Beth's death, but never Marmee's. And Marmee's has a great monologue about how Beth has always been the one that has never left home and she's never going to leave home. And I think that was a really powerful monologue and beautifully done by Emily Watson. I think all the actors in this show do a good job. However, I do think there's problems with the script, and I will be going into that with Laurie. I don't like how they portray Laurie in this version. I feel like he's too much of a straight man, not in the sense of sexuality, but more so like he's very, very serious at some points. And I kind of do miss Laurie having fun. I've only seen like a few scenes of him having fun. And Laurie is definitely not that. Laurie is trying to have fun as much as possible with the March siblings. But every time him and Joe are together, I just don't see anything that would bring them together. It's not that they don't have any chemistry. No, it is. They don't really have a lot of chemistry compared to the other adaptations. I just feel like they have no fun times together, because in a majority of the scenes that they're together, they're either fighting or somehow Laurie makes a weird flirtatious action towards Joe. Like I said, in the 1994 version, the one thing I don't like about Laurie's proposal in that version is that he does do a non-consensual kiss towards Joe. You don't only get that in this version, you get that twice. He kisses Joe twice, and Joe does not like it twice. It's just very odd with the choices of Laurie's character. And I don't know why, but I just miss a lot of Laurie being Laurie. Laurie's development, as from what I've seen of the adaptations, is that he stays really much a little kid for a majority of Little Women until he kind of realizes that he needs to mature, and Amy kind of helps him realize that. But I feel like in this version, he is very much very young for a majority of it. My problem with this adaptation of Laurie is basically most of Laurie's storyline is only towards Joe romantically. It feels like very much of a lot of his scenes that he's actually in are just interacting with Joe and trying to flirt with her. There's also a comment that Laurie makes about him being flirtatious or something, or being flirty. And like, Laurie flirts, but he doesn't acknowledge it. He's like basically one of those people where even talking to him will make you fall in love with him, and I don't like him acknowledging it. It's just awkward for him to do. So that's my problem with Laurie. And they try to have him have charisma, but it just played off in a very weird way, which, as you can see, is why I'm scared for the Little Mermaid adaptation, but I don't think it's the actor's fault. I think it's just the direction of the show. However, him with longer hair, they better have his hair for that for when they play Prince Eric, because Prince Eric has longer hair, but not in the fucking style of a ponytail. So, you know, don't put him in a ponytail. Anyway, I'm getting too ahead of myself. This is a Little Woman video, not a Little Mermaid video. Did you see what I did there? Anyway, so as I mentioned earlier in this video, one of my very big positives of this miniseries is that they do a really good job with Meg. She's given more time. She's given more screen time, not only just to herself, but her relationship with her siblings. I don't think there's enough time dedicated to her and Mr. Brooke, but there's still a lot that happens with them, if that makes sense. I think it just, every scene that they're in together, there's something that happens, but it doesn't really add to it. Her and Laurie have a few scenes together, which I really, really like. I think it's really interesting to look at Meg and Laurie's friendship. So I've already talked about my opinions on Laurie, which many of you know probably by watching this video that I do really, really love Laurie as a character. But let's talk about Joe, because I'm sure many of you are interested in how Joe is portrayed in this show. I think Joe's really well done in this show. I do like Winona Ryder's performances a little more than Maya Hawke. Maya Hawke definitely has charisma in this role, but just not as much as Winona Ryder. Also, I just think she was given a better script than Maya Hawke. But I like what they do with Joe a little bit. In the 1994 version, when Amy gets hit with the ruler, the whole family kind of agrees that she should get like taken out of school and that Joe will teach her. But in this version, Marmie's already gone to Washington, and when that happens with Amy, Joe is the one that takes her sister out of school. And I really, really liked that. I thought that was really, really good for Joe's character and for her to take that on to teach Amy, because in the other version, she's very mad about it. But in this version, she's like, I'm taking this on for my sister. I'm like taking her out of harm's way. And I think that's a really, really interesting perspective. There's a scene with her and the professor where the professor is talking about how the bad stories in the newspaper that are written by Joe, but he doesn't know it's Joe. And like, she talks about how she writes them so she can get money to give to Beth so that she can take her to the sea, which isn't in the 1994 version. And I'm glad they put the beach version in this. But the professor's like, oh, I'm sorry if I didn't know that. And she's like, well, why would it change that I'm earning this money for my sister? Do you still think those stories are crap? So I do like what they do with Joe's character more so. However, I still like feel like there's something missing from it, if that makes sense. Let's talk about Amy, because again, like I mentioned, this is the first out of the two adaptations that do keep Amy's original actor playing her younger and older self. And I think the actress that plays Amy does a really, really good job of keeping the like childlike wonder of Amy for a little bit and then having her mature. There's like some scenes with her that I feel like there's something missing. I love all of these performers. I think they do a great job with the script. I just feel like there's something missing from the script. To add on, I think the woman that plays Beth does a really good job. I think she adds very much some heart and some courage to Beth that I really, really liked. And no offense to Claire Danes, but kind of what I felt like the depth of missing of Beth's character, because Beth in the 1994 version doesn't really have a lot to do and you don't really hear her internal struggles. So to see that on screen and have her talk about it in this version and have more time to it is really good, I think. So let's talk about, personally, one of my favorite things to talk about is Joe and Laurie's proposal. I am okay with it. I'm in the middle of how they do it. I do really like that he breaks down. I think that's really, really good. I think it's good for Laurie to break down because, as I mentioned, I really like it when Laurie is emotional because it's nice to see a guy character be emotional about romance. It kind of comes out of nowhere, though, because Laurie in this version is a very built up wall character. And also for this to be like basically her coming back so she can take care of Beth just seems like a very awkward place for them to have this proposal. I just think the a lot of the events that happen in this show are weirdly placed, and I think it's because the book is longer and the book is done in 2 parts. I don't like in this adaptation that Joe finds out that Amy has married Laurie by a letter. I just feel like her reaction to that wasn't as big as it should have been, her reading this letter. I think it's better just for Amy to be like, here's my husband, and then Laurie just pops out. I just think it adds to the emotion and the build-up. I really, really like in this version that Laurie has a conversation with Joe after Amy comes with Laurie and that they're married. I liked that. That's, again, something I mentioned that I felt was missing from the 1994 version. However, I miss her having a conversation with Amy about it. Amy and her have a conversation about her and the professor, but nothing else after it. I also do like that this version ends with the family rather than just her going into the house with the professor and we never see the repercussions of it. I think the 1994 version is more of a cozy, lighthearted movie. This is basically its dark reboot predecessor. Not as dark, not like Riverdale, like Jughead and Betty blowing up shit, but I think it's more of a serious and realistic version of Little Women, which I do really enjoy, but I feel like some of that does overpower its soft and sweet moments. Overall, I do enjoy this adaptation much more than I did originally. However, some of my problems of this adaptation still stands, like how they portray Laurie, how like long it feels, and how they select the events they choose. However, I do like the new look at different characters, including Meg, Beth, and Marmee. Let's get on to the next adaptation. The next chapter. Oh boy!
I'm going to kill you! What is going on? She burned it! Burned what? Put that down!
Hello, welcome to chapter 3 of my Little Women video. Now this chapter 3 wasn't supposed to be my chapter 3, if that makes sense. Originally, when I was going to do this video, I was originally only going to look at 3 Little Women adaptations. I was only going to look at those and talk about my feelings on each of them. But then I watched this one, and then I felt like I needed to talk about it. It reminds me that movie sucks sometimes. So this Little Woman came out in 2018, which is funny if you think about it because there's literally 3 straight years of Little Women adaptations every year because we have the 2017 miniseries, what we just went over, this one, and then we have the Greta Gerwig 2019 one that we'll be reviewing next. It just shows that Little Women has always been adapted, and it will forever probably be adapted like every year, which is like okay if it's good. Okay, little context to this 2018 movie. So this Little Woman movie stars I would need to look at the cast because I only know like 3 people in this cast. Jo March is played by Sarah Davenport. Allie Jennings plays Beth March. Melanie Stone plays Meg. Why did I say Beg? Taylor Murphy plays Amy March. And then the people that I actually do know is Lucas Gabriel plays Laurie. If you don't know who Lucas Gabriel is, you didn't have a childhood growing up. Bart Johnson, another High School Musical alum.
What the heck are those 2 doing in a tree?
Plays the March's dad. Ian Bowen plays the professor, and in the famed role as Marmee March is Leah Thompson. And if you don't know, Leah Thompson is the hot mom from Back to the Future. So for the context of this movie being made, this movie started production in 2017. It was going to be the directorial debut of Claire, last name that I don't know. She wrote a screenplay adaptation of Little Women with Christy Schmick. This film, the production companies of this was Main Dog Productions, Paul List Productions, and then it was distributed by Pinnacle Peak and Pure Flix Entertainment. Now, if Pure Flix Entertainment sounds familiar to you, which I hope it's not, because it wasn't originally until I read a Letterboxd review that told me that they made the critically acclaimed movie God Is Not Dead. So you're like, Julia, what is your actual thoughts on this movie? As I said before, this movie shit. Again, this film was literally released a year before the Greta Gerwig one. Like, this was a year before. Do I personally think that they made this movie because the Greta Gerwig one was coming out? Probably not, but I like to come up with a theory that they're pulling a Good Times. So Good Times was a production company back in, like, I would say the 80s, 70s, 90s, old-timey stuff. What Good Times would do would learn about what is the most recent Disney movie that was in production, get intel of what that movie was about, and then basically copy it very quickly before that Disney movie would come out, and then they would release their VHS version of it, and then would release it with like a cover very similar to the Disney version, so that when families went to like movie places, like videotape stores, to get the Disney version, they would end up getting confused with the Good Times production, and it ended up being so bad that Disney actually sued the company for it. That's this company pulling a Good Times. So Julia, what makes this movie so bad? Because we haven't even gotten to what makes this movie bad. This movie still has a similar storytelling to the Greta Gerwig version. It's told through nonlinear storytelling and flashbacks for the beginning of the movie. It doesn't happen for the rest of the movie. Only for, like, I would say an hour, and then they completely forget about it. If you're gonna do nonlinear storytelling, keep it up. Like, there should be a reason why you're telling a story in nonlinear storytelling. Because if you're just like, here's the present, there's the past, there's nothing connecting them, then why? Like, for example, the one time that they do go from, like, the present to the past is because Jo is holding a book that somehow relate to her family, and that's it, and their childhood, and that is it. My first kind of complaint with this movie is freaking Jo. You've been watching this video. I really love Jo. I've seen bits and pieces of her myself, and also I just think Jo is one of the most well-written characters. I don't want to sound mean, and I don't want to be rude, but Jo March in this version is,
Well, it's really nice to meet you, Brian.
It's actually Ryan.
Oh, Ryan.
Yeah. Bitch.
Jo is an asshole in this movie. Like, a complete asshole. Like, you could literally tell that this screenplay did not understand Jo as a character. I mean, it doesn't understand any of the characters in general, but especially Jo. If you can't get Jo, who's like one of the driving forces of this book, you can get out. Like, Jo and Amy have like that kind of young and older sibling relationship where when you're younger, you kind of dislike your sibling because you're young, and you just dislike them because they're annoying to you. But then as you grow up, you kind of get a respectable relationship with them. Like, that's just Jo and Amy's relationship. But like here, it seems like Jo literally wants to murder Amy. Like, murder her. I think she even like threatens her with like a fire thing that you get rocks out with in the fire. Literally any scene that Jo and Amy share together, Jo is ridiculing Amy. And like, yeah, she does it in the original, but just not this much. It's not like every scene she is purposely like bullying her, and it's not like jokingly. It's like severe, like kicking her out of like the playhouse when they're younger, making jokes about her stuffing her bra, like literally like outing her crush on Lori. When Amy threw the journal in the fire, I literally yelled out, "Hell yeah, get her ass." You're supposed to like be like, oh, Amy's just a young kid. Like, I understand her struggle. Like, there's a reason why she did it. It's still wrong because we care about Jo. But here I was like, Jo is too much of an asshole and so like, that I was like, it's whatever. Like, Jo has always been a like very confident and independent woman, but like there's more to her than that. And by only having that makes her unlikable. So basically what I'm saying here is that they took the characters of Little Women in this movie, they chopped it in half, like the characters in half, and only started taking the stereotypical versions of them and then sliced it again to get one character trait for each character. and Joe gets the worst of it. There's scenes where Joe should not be mad as she is, but she is. When Meg gets married, Joe never really hates or like dislikes Meg for wanting to get married. She questions Meg for getting married and having kids and wanting that in her life, but it's never to the point that she doesn't want to like go to her actual wedding. Like, that's not a plot point. Oh my god, she's just so annoying. We get into her relationship with the professor, which I find really, really weird because this, as you can tell, this is a modern adaptation of Little Women. This obviously isn't taking place in whatever year Little Woman is. It's fine to do a modern take, but like the way that they write the professor and her relationship is really weird. The professor in Little Women is just a person that also teaches the kids that she's nannying. Nannying? Is that even a verb? But like the kids that she's taking care of. So like they work together. So it's like a work relationship. But here it's just very odd.
Hi, so editing Julia here, but not really editing Julia because I have someone else editing for me. So I do want to comment on what I was trying to say at this part of the video because I feel like I didn't explain it well. So we're gonna try again. In some adaptations of Little Women and also the original book, the professor lives in the same place that Joe lives also. So they're like neighbors. And also to add on, in some adaptations, Joe is taking care of the kids that the professor is the teacher of. So it's not just like, oh, like they're like neighbors, and in some adaptations, they're neighbors and coworkers. So there's like that kind of relationship. And also they become friends. So like all of that is first. They're like their working relationship, their neighboring relationship, and then their friendship that grows into a romance. So it's not that weird of a relationship. However, in this adaptation, for him to be her editor, there's a very big power dynamic of him being her editor. Because there is a part in the book where there is a part in Little Women where the professor looks over the like different drafts of her work, but it's not to the extreme because he's not her editor. He's just a person that she trusts to show her work to. So it's weird to make that their full relationship is that he is her editor. Back to the video.
And I feel like this movie kind of probably didn't know that Louisa May Alcott just had to add in the professor, because you can tell that they just went by the book, because the professor never comes back in the like 50 minutes or whatever, and then he randomly comes back. Like, the reason why nonlinear storytelling helps with this case is so that you can show the relationship between Joe and the professor scattered out, but they never fully take it, and it's really odd. So how's my Laurie ranker? Lucas Grabeel, I love you as much as possible. Like, you're a great guy. You're not Laurie. It's just the way that he plays Laurie is, like, really weird, and maybe it's because my High School Musical brain is like, Ryan. He just doesn't have the charisma of Laurie and just, like, the likability of him, and maybe it's just the way that he's written in this is just, he's very plain. And there's no chemistry between neither him, Amy, or Joe. Like, there's none. And then the scene where he proposes to Joe, it's like just basically him saying like, let's go to New York together. It just feels really awkward, and it doesn't feel earned, and there's not a lot of emotional thing behind it. Also, why the hell does he have so many freaking hats? You know what Laurie was doing in the room when Joe, like, runs in? He's practicing his hat tricks. I'm literally telling you, like, this is the shot. I feel like Lucas Grabeel has been typecasted with hats ever since High School Musical. Like, every role he's in, he must have a hat. I think the only role that he's ever not had a hat for is when he plays himself in High School Musical, the series. It just, like, a lot of the relationships that work in the original just don't work here because not enough time. We don't even see Amy and Laurie together, which just makes it really odd. And the way that it's written, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. If you didn't read the book, if this was your first Little Woman adaptation and Amy and Laurie start kissing, you're like, what the fuck? Like, when did they get together? There was no chemistry. She had a small crush on him. when she was younger. And also there's a weird part where he's like a full-ass adult and she's a full-on teenager, and he like talks about kissing her. Like, I know they're childhood friends, but like you're like going into, I think he's already in college. I think he just completed his like college and she's probably still in high school. Oh. Yeah, that's another thing I don't like about this adaptation. You never know where things are. There is time jumps, but there's never a difference in time jumps. Like, you can't really tell, except they do this weird ass red light transition like they're freaking Steven Spielberg. You can tell they had a shoestring and a budget, and like there are good movies with shoestring and a budget. Like, I've talked about this with my friend. If you write a really good screenplay and it's like really good, if you're watching a movie where the screenplay is really good but you can tell there was no budget in this movie, you're still going to be able to appreciate the story and the screenplay because you know it's good. This just doesn't have a good screenplay to begin with. There was like very much like screenwriting error 101. A lot of the characters, what they do is say what they're feeling, what they're saying emotionally, and it's just really, really badly done. There can be some really good modern adaptations of stuff, but this one is just like cheap. I'm thinking in like the writer's room, they were like, Meg and Joe go to a ball in the original, right? What if we make it a college party? And that's where Joe meets Lori in his freaking hat. Overall, this movie is probably, again, one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It fails on the part of a Little Woman adaptation, and it just fails on just being a movie in general. I put this movie above Paul Blart Mall Cop, Dirty Dancing 2017, but I put it below both of the Tall Girl movies and Gem and the Holograms. And also the After We Fell movie. Basically, this film is one of the worst films I've ever seen this year. I hope this part isn't as long as it's saying to film.
And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. But I'm so lonely.
Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 4 and the final chapter of my Little Woman video. This is probably the part you've all been waiting for because this is probably the only Little Woman besides the 1994 movie that's been critically acclaimed, and that is Little Woman 2019. I saw Little Woman 2019 when it came out because I was alive. I don't think I liked it as much as a lot of people did, but that's because I saw Jojo Rabbit the same day as Little Woman. Seeing Jojo Rabbit and Little Woman in the same day is a terrible mistake because, not saying that you can compare the two movies, but one of them is better than the other. I'm not going to say which one. So I didn't love it as much as a lot of people did. So when I came back to watch this movie for this series, I was like, I'm ready to change my mind. And I did. I changed my mind on this one. So Little Woman 2019 is directed by Greta Gerwig, who is known for her work in Lady Bird and the upcoming almost leaked Barbie movie. Who stars in this movie is Saoirse Ronan playing Jo. She's known for her work also in Lady Bird and also in the critically acclaimed movie The Host. That is sarcasm. Florence Pugh plays Amy, and her work is known for the movie Midsummer and the upcoming movie Don't Worry, Darling. I don't know. That's a movie. Emma Watson plays Meg, and you might know her from her work on the most famous movie ever, The Bling Ring. Elizabeth Scanlon is an actor that I have never really seen, but she looks familiar, who plays Beth. Marmee is played by Laura Dern, who you might know from the very critically acclaimed movie Jurassic Park. See, I tricked you. You think I was gonna say some movie that Laura Dern was in that wasn't well received, but I twisted it. Timothée Chalamet famously plays Laurie, and you may know him from his work at NYU giving people chlamydia. Meryl Streep's also in this movie, and that dude from Better Call Saul, but they're not in the main cast, so I wasn't gonna reference them. But now I am. This Little Woman was very much critically acclaimed when it came out. I believe it was nominated for 6 Oscar nominations. It won for Best Costume Design, which many costuming people don't like. So for this movie to win for Best Costuming Design, oof, that's rough. So this movie was very much critically acclaimed when it came out. But was this movie actually good? Yes. I can tell you right now, there's probably not going to be a lot of unpopular opinions, except one that I'm thinking of right now. with this movie. So let's get right into Little Woman 2019. So Little Woman 2019, as I've established, is told in non-linear storytelling. So there's past and present going back and forth. I was very surprised with a lot of the stuff that I would think would be in the middle of the movie being at the end of the movie. And I think it really, really works to this movie's advantage. They really thought about where the past and the present come together and also what scenes follow each other. And I think that's really interesting. My friend who has never seen this movie, he asked me, is this like, does this usually how all the other Little Women like movies are? Is it told in like a non-linear storytelling? And I said, no, is like directly like chronological. And he's like, I could never imagine Little Woman being told in any other way than this way. And I think that's what Little Woman 2019 really has, because obviously Little Woman 2019 is like 10th plus Little Woman adaptation, and literally it's the 4th one that we've reviewed here. So it has to do something different to establish itself differently from the other adaptations. And I think telling it in a non-linear story and it being well done is really, really good. I remember when this movie came out, a lot of people were pissed off because they were like, oh, you can't really tell the past and the present. It's not that hard to, you know, look. The way that they tell the story with like the different scenes going back with each other is super, super interesting. And the transition of shots are always perfectly placed. The next shot mirrors the shot that was originally shown. So for example, the shot where Jo is sitting alone on a hillside and she's sitting down crying, and then the shot changes to her alone in her attic standing up on the other side, and it completely mirrors it, and it makes sense of why. And that's what I was complaining about earlier with the 2018 version. Some of the transitions just did not make sense. It did not make sense why we went back to the past. It didn't make sense of why this would connect them to the past. I remember the first scene being like, the reason why Jo remembers her childhood is because looking at a book with the kids, like her and her family as kids. But this movie, what it does is that it's either like characters that are in the same place or a different place that has the same feelings of it. So like, for example, there's another transition early in the movie when Laurie is looking at Jo through the window, and she is young and she has the window on and it's yellow, and then it changes to Jo in the city with blue lighting, and it's very great. Like, again, I just think that like each of these shots were perfectly planned. When I watched the 1994 version, I said that I think the shot where Jo goes into the bedroom and she sees that the bed is not made should last longer. And this one did it, because in the recovery scene of Beth, Jo wakes up, she sees the bed is not, she like very much rushes downstairs and sees her mom and the servant, and then her mom turns and Beth is standing behind her. And then the scene after that, or a few scenes like after that, Jo runs downstairs very like quietly, and her mom turns and no one else is there, and they know that Beth is dead. Like, they don't need to say that Beth is dead for you to know as the audience that Beth is dead. So let's talk about the characters, because as I established in a lot of adaptations, I really do care about how they do the characters. You know how in most of the adaptations that I've said before, they do things with certain characters, but they don't do it with other characters? I feel like with this adaptation, I think each of the characters equally gets some kind of character development or storyline or relationship with other people. I was very, very surprised to see Meg and Brooke have a lot to do, even though they have a lot of not as big scenes. Like, the miniseries had a lot more Brooke and Meg scenes, like with them on their own. But in this one, I feel like there's less, but each of the scenes that have them in are super, super important. And also their storyline is so, like, I would say relevant, just also like something that's never really brought up in the other adaptations, which is Brooke being poor. And Meg dealing with that, because she just feels more confident when she's beautiful, and there's no wrong thing with that. Her entire storyline with Brooke in the present is about her buying this cloth when she should be buying her husband's coat, which understandably she should have done, but you know, it's her fatal flaw of her wanting to have nice things. But then she has this conversation with Brooke at the table. It makes it seem like she wish she married rich rather than poor. They have a little bit of a falling out, but then at the end, Brooke comes to her and I don't know if he apologizes, because he shouldn't, but he says something and Meg's like, you shouldn't apologize. Like, I love you and I love that you're my husband. And it's so, so sweet, because then after that entire thing, it's their wedding, which is really, really sweet, because like you have the present of like them being a married couple, and then it goes to them getting married. So it's them being happy as a married couple and them about to be happy to be a married couple. As much as like I feel like Little Women doesn't play down Meg for marrying down, it doesn't do that. I think this version like really plays it up that like her decision is good because she wants to. Like she has this whole discussion with Joe, which I think is a really, really beautiful scene of Joe being like, the reason why Joe doesn't want Meg to get married is because she's gonna leave her. And I feel like some people completely miss that, the 2018 version. Meg is like, I love him, and what I want in my life is to get married and have kids and like have a husband who loves me and I love him. And I want to marry him because I love him. And you can see the differences between Meg and Joe as a characters. And it's just such a great scene. Like, I just really, really love that scene. I also really love Beth. Beth in this version's done really, really well. And the thing that I really, really love about Beth is that I think she doesn't have a lot to say, which is one of my things. But I feel like this movie, you don't have to say a lot to get it. I just like Beth. I think Beth is always like going to be a good character. And I really, really like what she does. Like, she's very selfless. So going into that, actually, in many adaptations, Laurie's grandfather, Mr. Lawrence, as we established, is a very grumpy old man whose other daughter died. He disowned his son for marrying an Italian woman. And then they had Laurie, and then both of them died, I think. But like, he's sad. Like, he's a sad old man. And the rumor, like, around the neighborhood is that, like, he doesn't like talking to people. He's very grumpy. And in other adaptations, him and Beth have a relationship, like a friendship. But, like, it's, like, more so, like, her warming up to him. And he, like, sees his young daughter that died in Beth. And in many versions, like, people play the piano, but he gets really mad at them until Beth plays it. But in this version, it's kind of the opposite in a way, where he actually wants people to play the piano. And it's actually a very good change. Originally, I was like, oh, I don't like that. But actually, it is a very good change, because with him already wanting someone to play the piano and Beth is the one that's playing the piano, like, that already, like, skips their, like, having to get over, like, him being a grumpy old man and her, like, being happy. And he's, like, kind of actually pushing her to do it. Beth originally doesn't want to do it because she's very shy. But then she kind of gets the courage to do it. And they really start a really good relationship. And, like, him kind of being, like, a grandfather to her. And it's very, very sweet. And he talks to her about his daughter. And he talks about how much, like, Beth has opened up to him. I think that makes Beth's death even more devastating, is his reaction to it. Because he's already lost both his daughter and his son. And now he's lost, like, the person that he kind of related his daughter with. Like, again, I think, like, different adaptations, the way that they take whoever reacts to Beth's death, like, not the worst, but like they take different directions with Beth's death. So, like, for example, the 1994 version has, like, Joe being there when she dies. Then you have the 2017 version where Marmee reacts, and the way that she reacts is, like, very emotional, and I really, really like that. Marmee does react in this version with her just crying, and I think that's really good. But, like, we get to see the grandfather, like, Laurie's grandfather, reacting to her death, and it's very emotional. I think he says, like, I can't even go into the house. Like, he's like he can't even do it again. And it's, like, very, very interesting. This actor is the dude from the Muppets movie. So every time he came on screen when I was watching it, I was like, it's Tex Richmond from the Muppets movie, the guy that rapped and hated the Muppets. So here is my little hot take. I don't love Timothée Chalamet as Laurie. I know, they're all gonna come at me. I think he's good. I just don't think he's Christian Bale. So I do have a soft spot for Laurie in the 1994 version, because I feel like he's having more fun and he's very put together. I feel like Laurie in this version is kind of awkward. He's just not as emotional or strong as a character because of that. You guys don't remember how I said, like, Laurie is flirty, but he doesn't, like, know that. It's just him being a nice person. You kind of don't get that in this version. Also, I feel like there's not enough scenes with him and the other March sisters together. Most of his scenes are him and Joe, which, like, obviously Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet have a fantastic chemistry. Like, they've been in movies together. However, the scene where they're all together as a family, so it's all the sisters, the mom, and they're all, like, taking care of Meg's foot, and he looks at them and he's like very much like wanting that, and then he leaves the house and it's all cold outside because it's winter and he's all alone and he's thinking about the family. I think that's very sweet. However, like, again, I didn't really see a lot of connection with him being a part of the Marsh family, if that makes sense. I think Joe and Lori scenes are fine. It's just there's not a lot of them, and I think it's because it's scattered throughout that you don't really get them until like kind of the end. I like the small character things that they do with Joe and Lori. Like, Joe gives Lori the ring and he keeps it, which he's like, Joe gave me this ring. And I like that he kept it, and you can kind of see in Timothée Chalamet's eyes, like, he personally sees this as more emotional than Joe does. He sees this as like a romance rather than a friendship, at least that scene. There's also the scene at the wedding where Lori like slides Joe like alcohol. She takes a sip of it, fucking hates it, and then gives it to him. Oh, the scene when they leave the theater and Meg is with Mr. Brooke and she has her hand on hair, and like Joe and Lori leave and Lori's about to like wanting to do that with Joe, but Joe punches him instead. It's like great small character moments, but I kind of wish there was more bigness, because then I think that would have deepened Lori a little more. I kind of wish there was more scenes of Amy and Lori to kind of get the sense of like Amy likes Lori in that way. There's the scene where she's like, when he first comes in and she's like, hi, I'm Amy. But I kind of wish there was more small Lori scenes. So like, for example, they take out kind of the storyline. They do have the storyline where Amy has to leave because Beth has scarlet fever, but there's never that scene where Lori and her talk about her writing her will, because that's a big Lori and Amy scene, and which I talked about in the 1994 version, is kind of establishes them as friends before their romance, and I kind of didn't like that we didn't get that. That kind of goes into my thoughts on Amy as a character in this adaptation. I love Amy in this adaptation. I think people have talked about that this is their favorite adaptation of Amy because it kind of gives more to her intellect. Because in many adaptations of Little Women, that you see more of Joe's perspective because she's majority the main character. But in this version, you see like how she deals with stuff. So like, for example, after the whole thing with the burning of the book, she's literally like trying to make agreement with Joe, like trying to apologize. Joe leaves to like go ice skating with Lori, and Amy's like, what am I supposed to do? I really want her to forgive me or whatever. And then her and Meg talk, which is another Meg and Amy scene, which we never really get a lot of Meg and Amy scenes. So that's a really good scene for them. And then that entire scene, the amazing scene in the painting room where she's like, I'm not a poet, I'm just a woman. A little woman. It's such a good scene. It's really funny because that scene happens. I think it goes instantly into the marriage proposal of Joe and Lori. And then it goes into Joe's whole monologue. A literal like masterpiece scene after another. It's like when you're binging The Office and every episode that you watch is a good episode. So every scene after each other is such a good scene. Also with this adaptation, I don't love Joe as much as the other adaptations. Not a lot of Joe is given to her until the end, which is kind of one of the things that I guess you could say has a problem with the non-linear storytelling, but I don't know. But then like you get into her whole freaking monologue and then you're like, never mind, there's the depth. It's such a great scene where she's like doubting herself for saying no to Lori. She's like, I think if he asked me again, I would have said yes. And the mom's like, no, you wouldn't. And she goes, I cared more to be loved than to love, or something like that. And her mom goes, that is not the same thing as loving. And she goes into this whole monologue about women. They have minds, they have souls. And I'm so sick of saying that love is all a woman is fit for. And I'm so sick of it, but I'm so lonely. And hearing her say, I'm so lonely, makes you burst into tears. It's so funny because I've heard like people make memes on Tumblr about like, you know, the handshaking meme where they're like this? That I've seen, it's like the Joe monologue from Little Women 2019 and Being Alive from Company, and it's like Ace Arrow Spectrum, and I'm like, yeah. So yeah, the Amy and Lori relationship, I do like. If they put together scenes from the 1994 version of young Lori and Amy together, and then them being adults in the 2019 version, then I think that would be the perfect version. Because as I said when I was reviewing the 1994 version, I feel like there's not enough Lori adult Amy scenes, and in this version, I feel like there's not enough Lori and Amy kid scenes. However, I think there's a really good adult Laurie and Amy scenes. The Laurie Joe proposal is absolutely beautiful. So in this version, Laurie is more emotional and more loud than other adaptations, which is totally fine. I actually think it's really, really good because I think both Joe and Laurie have like a bit of anger in them. But Laurie is really good because he is like, it's like one of the most famous monologues from this movie is he's like, "There's no use, Joe. We gotta have it out. I have loved you ever since I've known you, Joe." And Joe's like, "No, no." And it's also gorgeously shot. It's on this like gorgeous hill, and I think it's probably one of the best shot like things ever. You know how I said in the Little Woman one in 1994 where I feel like Laurie tones it down a little bit at the end once he realizes that Joe is gonna say no, and I think that happens in this version, and I think it's same thing. She's like, "I'm never gonna marry, like I'm never gonna do that," and he's like, "No, you will, and I'll watch," or something like that. And he like and he says it very quietly and softly, and he leaves Joe there, and Joe sits down on this beautiful hill and starts crying, and it's great. Speaking of Joe and marriages, so I do really like the professor in this one. As I think I established with other adaptations, I feel like the professor isn't given much time, but in this one I feel like he is. And I kind of don't like that he and Joe don't really talk a lot. That's the one thing. Like, he's given enough time, but I feel like their friendship isn't as big as it is in other adaptations. One of the last kind of times you see the professor is him reviewing Joe's work. It's like, it's good, and like Joe like yells at him. But then at the end of the movie, she's like, "I ruined this friendship because of my temper." And that's also a really good conversation that Marmee and Joe have about both of them having tempers, which is really good. Just thought I would let that out there. I felt like it wasn't established enough for some people that when the professor is reviewing Joe's work and he doesn't like it, that he doesn't like it because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of heart with it. In some adaptations, he makes a comment about like, "Personally, I don't see your heart in this, like right from like what you know, rather than like what sells." Me and my friend got it, and then our other friend didn't really get it, so we had to explain it. But like, I feel like there would needed to be one more line where he's like, "You're writing for the masses." I think Joe does say something around those lines of being like, "Well, this is what people want, so I'm gonna write it." But like, I wish there was more of a turning point for her to like reference that, because like, that's the reason why she writes Little Woman, is because of the professor's advice, and also because that's what Beth would have wanted. What I also really like about how this movie is portrayed is that you kind of feel like it's not actually Joe's life. It feels like you're reading the Little Woman that Jo March wrote rather than the version that actually happened to her. Like, this feels like the book that she wrote, because at the end, when she's about to go get the professor, it cuts to her and the editor talking about how she doesn't end up with him, but she has to because that's how the books are. So then after she says fine, she'll marry the professor, and then it instantly goes into her getting the professor. Another thing I loved about this adaptation, I think in the 1994 version, I don't like that she doesn't talk to Laurie, but talks to Amy. And then in the miniseries, she talks to Laurie but doesn't talk to Amy. In this version, guess what happens to Joe? They both talk to her and asking her for like her consent, because Laurie comes up to her when she's like sleeping or something, and he's like, "Look, I think you're just gonna nip in the bud. I love you and I love Amy differently, and that's okay, and I miss you." And then Joe's like, "Great." Then she runs downstairs, she sees Amy for the first time, and it's kind of their like moment of sister rekindling, and she's like, "Yo, are you good with me and Laurie being together?" And Joe's like, "Yes, I'm very happy for you." And it's great. You can have these two characters talking about the same thing, but it kind of brings something more to it. You get Amy and Joe's sisterly bond, and then you have Laurie and Joe's friendship established, and it's great, and it's lovely. That's it for my 2019 Little Women adaptation reviewy thingy. Let's go on to the conclusion. Waka waka. So my parents got the ocean room, even though I'm the one with a literal wrong side wave tattoo. Hello, welcome to the epilogue of my Little Woman video. I really hope I kept with the book, like little metaphors throughout this video, or else it's gonna look and sound very weird. But we've gotten to the end. You've made it. because, you know, it fits that it's an epilogue, not a final chapter, because an epilogue is where most of the time you see where the characters are and their thoughts on what just happened throughout the book. And I think it's interesting if we do an epilogue. If you watch this video and you're ready for me to say which I think is the best Little Women adaptation, you came to the wrong video. This video was definitely not me saying, okay, here is the best Little Women adaptation. That was not my mission with this video. My mission of this video was basically to compare the adaptations, just like basically like to see what themes either go throughout the entire adaptations or are completely missed in the adaptations, or different things they choose to do with these adaptations. Like, if you are saying to me, like, Julia, if you had to choose your favorite one, I don't know what my favorite one would be, because each of these adaptations, besides the 2018 one, there is multiple great things with each of the adaptations, and also there's some problems with them too. Like, I can look at the 1994 version and appreciate the kind of warm feeling and the great acting. But then I can also look to the 2019 version and like what they did with the storytelling and some of the characters. And I can look to the 2017 miniseries and talk about how they made it more realistic than majority of the film adaptations. I feel like every person has their own bias and favorite Little Women adaptation. But then I can talk about the things I dislike about each of these adaptations and what went wrong in some of them. Each of these adaptations, I feel like for everyone, it's going to be a different opinion. Every person is going to have some kind of nostalgia and bias or some kind of favoritism when it comes to a certain adaptation. And that's totally fine. Like, hell, if you came up to me and said your favorite Little Women adaptation is the 2018 movie, I would ask you, are you okay first? But then secondly, I'll be like, that's your opinion. Because adaptations are meant to be different ways that we interpret a text. Now, if you're looking at this video and you're saying to yourself, what is the future of Little Women adaptations? Because hell, there were 3 straight years of Little Women adaptations. We're never gonna get rid of Little Women. There's always going to be adaptations. What would I personally want from new adaptations of Little Women? Well, obviously, as we've seen with all of these adaptations, they are very much white. So much white. Like, I mean, if you look at all these adaptations, they are definitely a loaf of bread. I was watching The Little Woman 2019 and I counted, like, there was only 2 black people. But actually, when you look at books specifically, Little Woman has been taken into different kinds of cultures. So, like, for example, there is a Little Woman adaptation that is a young adult book that all the marches are black women. And I can't wait to read that. There's multiple young graphic novels that are done for kids where majority of the marches are people of color and foster kids. But that's majority of what I would want for Little Women adaptations, is for it to go into more of diverse, because as we saw with Fire Island in 2022, you can take a classic story that is predominantly written by a white woman and like talks about the subject of classism and somehow relate it to the modern world, like the actor and writer did for Fire Island, that took Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice and morphed it into intersectionality and classism in specifically gay man community. Even during the time that the Little Woman 2019 one was being made, there was an article written that was basically talking about how Laurie could have been a person of color, but instead they casted the pasty white man known as Timothée Chalamet. If you read the novel, Laurie is actually described as being a darker skin tone. And then you add into the whole queer subtext of Little Women. Like, yes, the Greta Gerwig one in the script does make comments and references to Jo being with her gender and even Laurie being with his gender, but that's never brought up to the forefront. So it'd be interesting to see different adaptations of Little Women not only bring up Jo's sexuality and gender, but other characters' genders and sexualities. Now, if you're looking to me and you're like, Julia, what are you gonna do next after this video? Sleep. But yeah, that is the end of the video. Please like, comment, subscribe, comment down below. What is personally your favorite Little Women adaptation? And what would you want to see in the future? And also, would you want me to do another one of these adaptation videos? I already have a list. If you guys want to see either me take on Pride and Prejudice or The Parent Trap, 2 completely different things, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you. Goodbye.